This is You've Already Been Hacked, recorded on 1 May 2021. This week we have a couple follow-up stories for hacks we've previously covered. The open source software tools and vault maker Hashicorp has disclosed a security incident that had occurred due to the recent CodeCove attack. Hashicorp, a CodeCove customer, has stated that the recent CodeCove supply chain attack aimed at collecting developer credentials led to the exposure of Hashicorp's GPG signing key. The private key is used by Hashicorp to sign and verify software releases and has since been rotated as a precaution. So that's the good news. The impact is to the subset of their continuous integration pipeline. And as a reminder, according to Coco's investigation, this compromise originally happened on the 31st of January, making this attack last for about 2 months. In all of this, Hashicorp's GPG private key that signs hashes used to verify their products was exposed. Quote, while investigations have not revealed evidence of unauthorized usage of the exposed key, it has been rotated in order to maintain a trusted signing mechanism, unquote. The older key has been revoked, and existing releases have been validated and re-signed, according to Hashicorp's disclosure. macOS code signing, also known as notarization, as well as Windows Authenticode signing of Hashicorp releases has not been affected by the exposed private key. Also, signing for Linux packages remains unaffected. There is one program that has yet to be patched, and that's Hashicorp's Terraform. Terraform is an open source infrastructure as code software tool used for safely and predictably creating, changing, and improving infrastructure. Quote, Terraform automatically downloads provider binaries during the Terraform initialization operation and performs signature verification during this process, according to the Director of Product Safety at Hashicorp. The company states that patch releases of Terraform and related tools will be published that use the new key during their automatic code verification processes in the near future. Our next follow-up is from the University of Minnesota, and they are responding to the Linux Foundation. If you recall, some researchers at the University of Minnesota attempted to conduct a code attack on the kernel for Linux, doing some malicious updates, and that went badly by getting the University of Minnesota banned from providing any updates to the Linux community. Well, according to ZDNet, the University of Minnesota has responded to the Linux community. According to Matt Helmdahl, UMN professor and department head of the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, the school appreciates the Linux Foundation's request, and they look forward to reaching a, quote, mutually satisfactory resolution, unquote, and that re-engaging with each other is always the way to go. Further, the department chair said, quote, we currently are considering your requests and are moving quickly as we can to produce a substantive response that addresses them. In particular, the research group is preparing a letter to the Linux community, and we are currently attempting to secure consent to release all information about the code submissions from the group. Once we've had an opportunity to look into the remaining issues, we would appreciate the opportunity to meet with you to discuss and move forward, unquote. Mike Dolan, on behalf of the Linux developer community, asked that the paper coming from this research, titled On the Feasibility of Stealthily Introducing Vulnerabilities and Open Source Software via Hypocrite Commits, be withdrawn because the researchers and their graduate advisor, an assistant professor at UMN, Computer Science and Engineering Department, experimented on Linux kernel and did so without the maintainer's permission. In a public note, the researchers and the advisor stated, quote, we wish to withdraw our paper that was previously submitted for publication in the 42nd IEEE Symposium on Security and Privacy. The paper had already been accepted by the high-level conference, and in the note, The researchers and the advisors stated they are withdrawing it for two reasons. One, admitting a mistake by not collaborating with the Linux kernel community before conducting the study. And two, they don't want their behavior and methods to be used as a model for others in doing Linux kernel research. Between the school's official response and the public letter of apology, it appears that UMN has acceded to the Linux Foundation's main requests. There are still fine details to be worked out, but for now, it appears that UNM, the Linux Foundation, and the Linux kernel developer community should be able to quickly come to peace with each other. Once that's done, the UMN can get back to doing research, and their maintainers can return to doing their real work of improving the kernel, rather than chasing down potentially bogus patches. And yet, that doesn't mean that the Linux kernel is not vulnerable. There is a new flaw that has been disclosed that allows the KASLR, or kernel address space layout randomization process, to be bypassed, and the discovery of additional unpatched vulnerabilities in ARM-based devices. The information disclosure stated the security vulnerability had been discovered in the Linux kernel, which can be exploited to expose information in the kernel stack memory of vulnerable devices. Specifically for this particular vulnerability, it is listed in CVE 2020-28588, and it exists in the proc PID syscall functionality of 32-bit ARM devices running Linux. This according to Cisco's Talus, who discovered the vulnerability. It arises from improper conversion of numeric values when reading the file. With a few commands, the attacker could, in theory, output 24 bytes of uninitialized stack memory, which can then be used to bypass the KSLR, which is an anti-exploit technique that places various objects at random to prevent predictable patterns that are guessable by adversaries. Attacks using this method would also be, quote, impossible to detect on a network remotely, unquote, according to Talos. And if this is utilized correctly, an attacker could leverage this information leak to successfully exploit additional unpatched Linux vulnerabilities. Talos went on to state that they can see the output of this vulnerability on any given Linux system whose kernel was configured with the config have arch trace hook, and they publicly disclosed this on this past Tuesday. The researchers went on to state that the file exposes the system call number and argument registers for the system call currently being executed by the process, followed by the values of the stack pointer and the program counter registers. The values of all 6 argument registers are exposed, although most system call use fewer registers than all 6. So essentially, anything that's happening at the kernel level, any data call, any system call, any function call, they're saying that this vulnerability allows you to read those calls as they're occurring. And this is very much a subsystem of the operating system, so it's not something that would be normally watched or evaluated or put in some sort of output. Now it is. The shell commands that trigger the vulnerability are super simplistic, and as anyone who's done any work on Linux knows, it's a copy paste, and it's not a lot of work. It's 3 lines of code. So you go into your terminal, you got command 1, command 2, command 3, and you're off to the races. That's frightening. Researchers at Talos first discovered the issue on an Azure Sphere device running version 20.10, which was a 32-bit ARM device that runs a patched Linux kernel. This vulnerability has been present since version 5.1 release candidate 4 of the kernel, and users are encouraged to update that version of the kernel, version 5.466, and version 5.98, according to the advisory. So basically, if you're running a 32-bit version of ARM Linux, update it immediately. And if you're running Linux, check your updates and just make sure that they're updating. And if you know how to look for what kernel version you are, I would suggest you do that. If you don't, a quick Google search will help you, and then you'll know whether or not you have to take some remediated actions. The Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C. has confirmed that they suffered a cyber attack after the Babook ransomware gang leaked screenshots of stolen data. In a statement to the press, the DC police stated that they are aware of a breached server and that the FBI is investigating the matter. Quote, "We are aware of an unauthorized access on our server. While we determine the full impact and continue to review activity, we have engaged the FBI to fully investigate the matter," unquote. The statement comes, however, after Babook Locker Gang said that it had compromised the DC police networks and stolen 250 gigabytes of unencrypted files. The folder names appear to contain files related to operations, disciplinary records, and files related to gang members and crews operating in the District of Columbia. The ransomware gang warned on the data leak page on the dark web that the Metropolitan Police Department had 3 days to contact them, or the threat actor will start contacting gangs to warn them of police informants. One of the screenshots that was posted, it included the timestamp of the 19th of April 2021 for all of the folders, which is likely when the threat actor stole the data. The Babook gang specifically pointed out one of the files, which, based on the title, is related to arrests after the January 6th protests that stormed the U.S. Capitol building. Cybersecurity firm MSC Soft discovered that the decryptor used by Babook contained severe bugs that could destroy files while they were being decrypted. So, even if DC Metropolitan Police Department paid the ransom, getting the files back might not happen because they could all be corrupted. Although maybe that's not the worst thing for them anyway. If they had them on a backup, they just want them not to be in the wild anymore. Moving more to the Midwestern states, a ransomware operator has leaked files taken from the Illinois Office of the Attorney General. This information was stolen on the 10th of April and was posted to dark web portals and includes private documents not published as part of public records. The ransomware gang, identified as DoppelPaymer, has leaked a substantial collection of files from the Attorney General's office on a server controlled by the group. The move came after ransom negotiations between the two parties broke down following the attack on the 10th. The leaked files include not only public information from court cases handled by the Attorney General's office, but also private documents that aren't part of public records, according to the security research firm Recorded Future. The files contain personally identifiable information about state prisoners, their grievances, and cases, according to the Post. The Illinois Attorney General's office acknowledged publicly on the 13th of April that, quote, "In the early hours of Saturday morning, it was discovered that the office's network had been compromised," unquote. Since then, the IT staff and investigators from the AG's office have been working closely with law enforcement authorities to evaluate the extent to which the network was compromised. And on the 21st of April, DoppelPaymer took responsibility for the attack and released several files stolen from the internal network as a teaser to other data dumped just this past week after negotiations about paying the ransom stalled for unclear reasons. However, historically, most of DoppelPaymer's negotiations tend to fail and reach an impasse after victims realize that paying the ransom brings legal complications, and those complications are due to a move by the United States Department of Treasury in December of 2019, when they added EvilCorp, the cybercrime group behind DoppelPaymer, to a list of foreign-sanctioned entities. By doing that, it makes any payment to these attackers strictly forbidden. after the Department of Justice charged 2 of the Evil Corp members following a massive federal crackdown on the group that focused on what they believed to be the group's leader. Quote, while the Treasury Department is open to approving some transactions, if victims reach out and request approval, it appears that the Illinois State Attorney General's office has not done so. Unquote. Apple has patched what noted Mac security researcher Patrick Wardell described to the press as, quote, the worst macOS bug in recent memory. An adware group had already begun using the bug in the wild. The bug, patched in macOS 11.3, allowed hackers to circumvent much of Apple's built-in malware detection for programs downloaded from the internet. macOS knows to apply additional scrutiny to downloads by activating a quarantine attribute built into the operating system. When all goes well, programs with that attribute trigger Apple's suite of system warnings and outright blocking of suspicious applications, using file quarantine, gatekeeper, and notarization. Apple released macOS 11.3 on Monday, which again updates these vulnerabilities so that those holes get closed. Ultimately, the problem is stemmed from how Macs install programs. Macs have the ability to wrap a normal install bundle around a script instead of a traditional program. So in short, a user could double-click on a sketchy program and install it without any of the roadblocks designed by Apple to get in the way. Apple publicly acknowledged the vulnerability and the patch fix to their credit. However, researchers who uncovered the vulnerability say that it could be used to devastating effect in unpatched systems. Wardell stated it was not uncommon to see Mac 0 days being used for adware, warning enterprise users to treat Macs like computers and not devices immune to malware, hacking, or other ill purposes. And finally, researchers from Kaspersky Labs on Monday reported that 22% of PC users are still using Windows 7, which Microsoft stopped supporting in January of 2020. In a company release, Kaspersky stated the study was based on anonymized OS metadata provided by consenting Kaspersky security network users. So, it's 22% of those that have Kaspersky installed on their systems, which they're using then to aggregate out. So maybe that number's right. It could be high. It could be low. Kaspersky strongly recommended that companies and all users update their operating system to Windows 10, the latest version of Windows. On the plus side, Kaspersky also stated that 72% of all its users run Windows 10. However, in a semi-concerning but very small population, less than 1% are running much older versions of Windows, such as XP or Vista. John Hammond, senior security researcher at Huntress, said end-of-life operating systems such as XP, Vista, Windows 7, etc. still run on a sizable number of production systems across all industries. Hammond said when security firms go through vulnerability assessments and audits, these end-of-life operating systems undeniably come up in their findings. Now, it'll also be interesting to see what percentage of the U.S. government is affected by this over the next 12 months as they attempt to go through all of their remediations and checks and validations because of that pesky little thing that was SolarWinds. That's all for the news this week. I'm your professor of cyber risk. We'll talk again soon. If you like this podcast, share it with your colleagues and friends. Your support is how we are able to continue to make this content. Thank you.